Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. My name is Alice.
And I'm 𝐶𝐿,
and this is episode 173.
And this is the first time you and I have been doing this. I know that I wanted to record an episode with you for quite some time, but we haven't done one before, right?
This is the first.
I'm excited. Right
It's
on.
exciting.
So, what was your weekend like? What have you been up to?
My weekend has been trying to relax and failing to relax, trying to disconnect and failing to disconnect. I thought, this weekend I'm not going to do anything. And then we sort of got roped into plans that ended up getting canceled, and I was grateful for that. But then I ended up just like studying all day Saturday. And I mean, Sunday was relaxing. I went to go visit my parents and got to spend most of the day at their place with their doggie, Phoebe, whom I love. And yeah, I did okay, but still not feeling like the rest weekend. You know what I mean? What about you?
All over the map, really. Let's see. Well, I feel like I've been trying to take personal time, give myself a dose of my own medicine, what I put out there. Remember being on a podcast with Brooke and John Thomas and saying to them, it's nice to not just decompress. Like that doesn't count as actual personal time.
Yeah.
Struggling to decompress for 20 minutes and half the time doing it, half the time not doing it, that's not downtime. Actually doing, even just hanging out. It's easier said than done when you have a lot going on. But on the flip side of things, we have so many exciting things to talk about, so much that we have happening right now that it's kind of hard to take a breather, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I don't even have words for all the plans coming through. I was just booking a whole bunch of flights for international athletes, for example, for a
Wow.
plant build. So that was pretty exciting. Spent today doing that. This weekend, we actually see, this is why Danny's a keeper. I took a 90-day training block and I allowed myself one extra day of rest right in between this training block that's going for 90 days straight. So what do you think happened on that day?
Uh,
She put me to work. We have a backyard project and we moved about
oh,
somewhere between $3,000 to $5,000 worth, 3,000 5,000 pounds, excuse me, worth of building material, pavers and sand and rocks for some
wow.
yard projects. And I was like, okay, well, someone that's going to push me on the one day that I give myself in 90 days to beat my body down, she's a keeper. In the other hand, gosh, we're pretty busy most of the time, just have a lot of things going on. So that was my weekend, actually. A lot of heavy lifting on my one supposed rest day.
Yeah, I know what you mean. So I was studying the OCB website and some OCB shows that were recorded on YouTube because I'm going to be taking a course to be a judge for the OCB. So I'm really excited about that. It's coming up very soon. And I want to be an overachiever and A++ and everything. So
Nice.
that was what I was working towards. But I'm glad that you got outside at least and doing something with your body, so you're not like glued into the laptop and glued into vegan proteins, right? At least there was some disconnect that way, right?
Yeah. And what I want to make sure is that what we are putting out there, the message that we give to our clients and those who are listening is you have to be balanced, right? You want to be balanced. If you're not balanced, find a way, or you're not going to be able to do incredible things.
Absolutely.
And it's important to take time for yourself. And it's important to give yourself a break. And it's important to be flexible. It's important to be mindful. And we've been saying this for years on end now, but we're not practicing what we preach. So in the spirit of that, I'm trying really hard to find a way, right? Even if you're quote unquote not doing what you want to be doing or feel like you need to be doing to be a to what you said, like an overachiever or just accomplishing all of your goals. And that's hard, right? And I feel like that's the perfect segue to what we're talking about today, because it's, or at least it's a good segue, because the idea is, what happens if you're not on track and you are feeling bad about being off track? What do you do to get back on track without feeling bad? And
Mhm.
I'm all ears. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so specifically, like what's going on with me right now, I just got back into my prep for my competition season in the fall, but I just went through this period, this time period where I was sort of in limbo. I finished competition season and it was time to, get back to normal life, back to normal body. And it was sort of like doing almost a 180 with my life because I didn't have this super, super, motivating and exciting goal dangling in front of me anymore. And it was sort of like, now just wait and don't mess anything up until it's time to start prep again. And it was almost like I couldn't, things were just sort of spiraling a little bit. I didn't, I mean, I'm exaggerating. It wasn't too bad, but I was feeling so lost and confused almost. Did you have that problem when you were coming off of your last prep?
I still think about that to this day. I'm reminded of a client who said it a week or two or three ago, and his message to me was, well, I know I have this goal and I know I want to achieve it, but the way I took it was like, unlike you, I don't have a bodybuilding competition looming to keep me on track, for example. And I use this, that's how I interpreted what he said. That's what I was thinking of it in terms of my own personal path. And
Hmm.
to your point, when you don't have that next goal to look forward to, or when it's not right in front of you, it can sort of, the rails can kind of come off.
Hmm.
And I don't want to say that sabotage sets in, but it can be a little hard to figure out your mindset, your approach. It can be a little hard to be accepting of how that's going to wind up making you feel, and the fact that you don't necessarily have control over that. And I'll tell you right now, in the 6 preps that I've done over the course of 20 years, more than half of them, well, more than half of them I've felt that way after the fact. Something or other eventually gives, because you realize that even though you're going to keep competing, there is time between those two competition seasons, and you have to find a way to be normal and balanced again.
Right, right. It was like the off track podcast. And I mean, I feel like it's mostly with nutrition. I haven't, I will say that there was a bit of a burnout feeling afterwards as far as going into the gym and not enjoying my gym time as much. But I think that was because, your energy's so low. You get in the gym and you don't have anything. I get really motivated and excited by getting heavier in my lifts, progressing, knocking out a couple more reps. And that's not going to happen as often when you're that lean. And so for me, like, yeah, there was a little bit of struggle with the gym, but it was mostly like struggle with nutrition and trying to continue to hit those macro goals just seemed almost like silly. On the one hand, you don't want to gain weight too fast. On the other hand, it's like, well, who cares? You just sort of get that, I don't know, it's sort of like a tug of war. I don't know.
It
But
is.
now I have my goal back in front of me again. I am getting ready to compete again, and it's such a relief. But I feel like, I kind of started this prep a little bit too early on purpose because I just needed something. And I needed to refine my internal motivators, like my intrinsic motivators. I don't know. What gets you remotivated when you're like right after a competition and what do you want to do for yourself? What brings you joy, during that process?
Remotivated for,
For physique goals, like getting back onto plan after season is done or after you've just hit a big goal. Because you've also done powerlifting too. So
It's a very good question, and I don't know that I have the solution or the answer for you. I think it changes each time. I have to accept that there's something I'm working towards, just being better and better, that I'm not succeeding at, and that I have unfinished business. Me personally, as an athlete, I like to think of my competitiveness as a career. And I know that there will have been blind spots after I compete that I won't be able to see until 6 months later or a year later or whatever, things that I could have done differently that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how do I say? I was so focused on competing that I couldn't see whatever it was that I didn't do right, or I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
willing to admit, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the idea is just my motivators are finding out how to be more competitive the next time around without it wrecking me as badly. And sometimes I win that battle and sometimes I lose that battle.
Okay.
How about you?
I think, there's certainly a degree for me that, fitness and weightlifting and bodybuilding in general and just the athlete lifestyle, like, is part of my identity. I think we can all kind of relate to that. I think a lot of people in our community can kind of relate to that. But if you don't have that, then, trying to find the joy in going to the gym again, trying to just maybe take a break from your plan as far as your specific fitness plan and just having time where you just go in the gym and just do what you want to do. And maybe just reconnecting in that way and just trying. The purpose now is just to have fun and enjoy your lifts and enjoy going again. Um, and of course, I've talked in the past about nutrition wise, trying to eat with a purpose of restoring your health, eat for a purpose of, I like to think of, all right, this food is going to fuel my body. So thinking in terms of bulking, even if I'm not actively trying to gain aggressively, and just trying to rephrase it that way and giving myself like little mini goals. All right, how am I going to reach that? As far as like, what am I going to eat every day to make sure that I'm fueling my body in the most optimal way?
One thing that is challenging to focus on is when you're eating a certain way for a period of time, it's hard to make a shift. Whether you're, I feel like it's easier to eat healthfully when you're cutting, when you're dieting down, however you want to call it, for a couple of reasons. It's good because you have a goal. It's good because everything is tracked. And it's good because it's motivating you to look a certain way. So then
Mm-hmm.
after the fact, it can be hard to continue to eat in a way that is healthy and that is good for your goals. So that's one example of how you can fall off track when you don't have that next thing in front of you to look forward to. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's easier said than done. I don't again, I don't have the answers or the solution per se. I just know that that motivation, in my opinion, needs to come from finding a way to be truly healthy and not chasing a certain look or chasing a certain benchmark or goal or whatever, because it's not gonna last. It's gonna go away one day. If you're trying to look a
Mm-hmm.
certain way for a certain day, whether it's a personal event, whether it's a competition, whether it's just for you, et cetera, et cetera. If you're trying to do that because you hope that it's going to keep you on track long term. Spoiler alert, it's not. It's not to say not to go for it. It's just that there's got to be a way after the fact to find out what you want to be and what you want to do to keep your health and to have the body you're looking for year round.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good segue, like into thinking about like how, although we have, we set these certain goals and we say and we feel like, okay, I'm supposed to want A, B, and C. A lot of times, like our bodies will betray us too, to a certain degree. And I'll give an example, like trying to include some more, like hyperpalatable foods myself and trying to repair my relationship with food, at that point in time, it's really hard because you almost can't stop once you started. And so you have to continue to challenge yourself and practice that thing. But at first, you just know that you just have to know and forgive yourself in advance that you're gonna fail. As far as like, all right, I'm gonna have, you know, a serving of this food that I love again because I can fit this in my life again, and just continuing to practice at that. And that was probably the hardest part. And that's when sort of like this cycle of guilt starts, right? And oh man, I should have been able to stop myself from eating too much of this food, and wondering how in the world you could let yourself do that when you just came off of this bodybuilding competition prep or this really, really strict diet and you were so good at limiting those things before. And it's like, who am I? It's like you lose part of your identity or something. I don't know. So your body definitely betrays you in that way. At least that was my experience. But I'd say, you know, right towards the end, I was getting more in control again, I'd say, and feeling more like a normal human being. And that was what it probably took me like 2 months. Is that realistic? Is that a realistic time frame, do you think?
It's fast. The
That's
last
fast.
prep that I did, I feel like it took a little longer than that, honestly.
Yeah.
Honestly. It depends. Every time, whenever you go through it, it's different. Whatever someone's reaching for, once they hit that goal, or if they narrowly miss it, or whatever, after the fact, it's going to feel different each and every time. And again, you don't have control over how you feel. You can just be aware. And sometimes you can get into like a negative thought process that's coupled with negative feelings, that's coupled with intrusive thoughts that keep reoccurring about like, damn it, I don't want to be this way right now. And on top of it all, it starts affecting your routine and what you're doing. And if you think about that kind of cycle, oh my gosh, could you imagine what that would do to somebody? Spoiler alert, you're a human being. You're just like everyone else, whether you like it or not. You know, you are not past your feelings. And it is something that requires work, and it is something that requires time for time to pass for you to get back to it, instead of like blaming yourself or, like you said, getting into a guilt cycle. It's it should be as simple as habit and discipline and just like shut up and do it and get to your next goal, and eventually you'll get there. But it's not. If you're like someone, like many people in the fitness industry or fitness professionals, or there's those who are probably listening to this podcast, you're probably the type who is a high achiever, who is goal driven, who likes to check the boxes, and who likes to accomplish big things. And that comes with a set of consequences, being that kind of person. No matter what kind of personality you are, when you take that approach towards something, in some ways you achieve and you get there. In other ways, you get hit with some challenges along the way.
For sure. And I think that's why, you know, when I work with my clients and I talk with my clients week by week, I'm always encouraging, you know, having balance and trying to find ways to fit in, you know, treats along the way so that we don't reach a point where we've just been so restricted, so heavily restricted that we reach the point where we rubber band in the opposite direction and completely lose control. And with competition prep, it's kind of like a forced scenario there a little bit, especially towards the end, because you feel like you have no calories.
Yeah, it definitely happens where you get put in that position where you're going to wind up making some decisions that you're going to regret after the fact. But again, you're not alone. There's no shame in that. It's honestly part of the process,
Mhm.
right? And we all go through it. So in one sense, I feel like it's helpful to focus on things that have nothing to do with your goal. In another sense, I could see the fear around that when you want to keep accomplishing and you want to figure it out, right? You want to get there, but sometimes taking a break from what you're doing, even if it's like a mental break or just like turning around and
Yes.
doing something that has nothing to do with it, could be just what the doctor ordered, right?
Yeah.
I literally write this stuff down, Alice. I'm not sure what your process is. I write the word hobbies down and I start
Hmm.
writing stuff out. What are things that have nothing to do with fitness? What are things that have nothing to do with being goal driven? And then I start to seek those things out intentionally and unintentionally. I look back at my list and I'm like, oh, yeah, those things are starting to happen because because I did a little brain dump, for example, right?
Yeah.
And I just let it go and I turn, and before you know it, I wind up being a little more happier and feeling a little better because I've given myself a little bit of a break from whatever it is that I've just been obsessed over, for example.
I think that's pretty great. I don't know. Yeah, I definitely do that often, but I think I do it more as like if I have a mini identity crisis and I feel like I get too wrapped up in one thing and I want to know, all right, what else is there to Alice besides this thing? It's usually fitness related. So, my family, the games that I like, my cooking, my hiking, doing things outside of the gym for sure. Like having that focus is very important. Pokemon Go has been my game lately. I talk about that a lot on social media now. Um, yeah. And also just performance goals as well. I was mentally preparing myself to switch into a bulking phase. And at that point, it was like shift focus into like strength gains, right? But also trying to find, I don't know, whether your thing is yoga or mobility, trying to be able to do a handstand or trying to be able to do a pull up, those kinds of things too can also be, definitely have your hobbies that you focus on. And definitely also like have some sort of performance goal, I think. So you have a nice mix of the two. You can find yourself again outside of your fitness and your weight loss streams.
Well, and the other thing that I think that adds insult to injury, and not to be negative, I just think it's part of it, is all the stuff that you ignored or didn't nurture enough to do something. When you go back and you want to give, it takes a little bit of time for everything else to be like, oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
Alice does want this. Alice does want to hang out with me, or Alice does want to do this thing that's fun, for example. So you're not exactly getting positive reinforcement for the things that you had to sacrifice or weren't able to give to enough while you were chasing a goal. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's something that is pretty common that people experience when they're really chasing something really hard, is they have to pay the price after the fact to get back to doing things. And that can be a little discouraging. So these, again, these hard feelings that are difficult to figure out, like, what do you do with them? It takes time.
Mhm. Mhm. Perfect. Like that just perfect example made me think of getting back involved with my local meetup group. We have a Facebook meetup group that's vegan. And of course, a lot of what we do is going to vegan restaurants, but they also do other things. Like they'll do bike rides down. We have some trails down at the beach that we'll do. Um, they'll have a game night at their house where we play board games, those kinds of things. And those are just great opportunities that you didn't really feel like you could be too involved in before. Um, when you're like so focused, especially if most of those meetups are going to be around food, you really feel like you can't participate in that. But making sure that you get out and be social again, reconnect with your friends, because you mentioned re-nurturing those friendships, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. That doesn't mean you're not chasing the next goal. It just means that the focus can shift a little bit while you're dealing with an uncomfortable environment after the fact. Because again, those rails can come off when you've achieved something. And it's like, okay, well, what's next? Or how do I keep
Exactly.
going, for example? And no one's above it. That's the kind of mindset where it doesn't happen by act. I don't care what kind of personality you have. I don't care how tough of a mindset that you've cultivated. You got to keep working on it.
Mhm.
Right? Absolutely.
Set your next set of goals, but it might take more than one try.
Exactly. And everyone's approach is different. Some people need to talk about their goal. Other people purposely don't talk about it. Like, I don't know if I'm going to do something again. I don't know what I'm doing next. Other people literally have to say it, right? Respect
Yeah.
your process, whatever it is. It's got to work for you. It has to make sense for you. There's no shame in your game. And you figure out what works for you over time. And honestly, sometimes you got to pivot. What worked for you once might not work the next time around. It's all about finding out what your process looks like long term. It's going to change. It's going to change for reasons that are out of your control. It's going to change because of your environment. It's going to change because of the people in your life. It's going to change because of life experiences and things that have happened around you and things that you've chosen as far as your experiences go. All these things can impact your mindset, your approach, how you feel, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's when you frame things like that, it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to be a little more accepting that no matter what kind of control you think you might have for your path, because you know exactly what you want. Maybe you're one of the lucky ones and they're out there that know exactly what you want. Getting there is you don't you don't get to tell the story. You don't get to dictate what happens. You have to go with the flow. You have to be flexible. And I feel like that kind of messaging is just not out there enough, because when it comes to the fitness industry, everyone's like, grind, hustle, do it. Just come on, come on. And I get that, but when that doesn't work, because eventually it won't, you're gonna be sitting there kicking yourself, blaming yourself, hating the world, being an unpleasant person to be around. And oh, spoiler alert, you're actually not going to get back on track. Imagine how crazy and sucky that is, right? So I guess
Right, exactly. There could be people that, if you are competing in bodybuilding, for example, don't most bodybuilders or most people who try bodybuilding end up deciding that they never want to do it again. Like the vast majority of like more people quit than actually continue. And that's okay. You know, maybe that means changing to a different sport if you're still really, because a lot of us, you know, all of us here in this community, I'd say, really love weightlifting. So finding another way to express it that's not bodybuilding, or, you know, for some people, maybe just trying something completely different. You know, I've had a couple, I've had a couple really close friends that I sort of coached a little bit, like on and off, who just decided they were like, you know what, I don't think, you know, body or, you know, specifically, and they're not talking about competing, but they're talking about bodybuilding. It's just as far as a lifestyle. They're like, you know, I think I'm going to focus more on my yoga. So that can happen too. And again, you don't know if that's what you want to stick with forever, but, you know, go and explore that path of yoga, and it might make you learn something about yourself, like, oh, actually, I did love that and I missed that and I want to go back to it. And then you can re-spark your inspiration and come back at it in a whole new light, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's any issue pivoting a little bit as far as your approach goes when you are in a position where you feel like you're floundering a little bit, and also you're just not in a healthy place or in a healthy way. It's so much better than fooling yourself or just being stuck in this loop of spinning your wheels and not getting anywhere, which people do. I've been there before in my past. And if I had the experience and wisdom back then that I do now, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that. So fortunately, you have us to talk about this stuff, and hopefully you cannot make the same kinds of mistakes that we've seen and the same kinds of mistakes that we have made. That's the whole purpose of this episode and why we do stuff like this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a really good example that a lot of bodybuilders end up toying with is they have to dip their toe in powerlifting, right? And some of them are like dual athletes, and some of them will flip-flop between the two. But I mean, it's not just that, you know, there's also, I'm thinking about like the Vegan Strong and Plant Built team, you know, there's also CrossFit, there's also kettlebell, you know, so there's lots of strength sports out there.
And that's the other thing too. You don't have to have, the goal doesn't have to be singular, and you don't have to have a narrow focus on one thing. It can evolve, it can change, and you can go with that, whatever it is.
Absolutely. And that's okay.
Yeah. Do you have anything else you want to talk about as far as tips with eating habits and nutrition? Because that's probably what most people look for, I would say, that kind of struggle right there in particular and how to get around it. Trying to think of some ideas that come to mind for me. For some of it is just straight up intentional. Like I literally forced myself to stop eating. I quit my eat patterns repeat themselves, right? Patterns have no feelings. They're not, but you wind up being unable to stop them because you have feelings, right? So your eating patterns, the ones that played out when you're in prep, you might think that you could just stop, but it's not that easy. because then you
Mhm.
start to feel whatever after the fact about how your eating habits are changing up on top of your body being what it is because you've pushed it so hard. So that can be really tricky. But that being said, Alice, I do think that I straight up change patterns up on purpose. I stop relying on food that's voluminous, for example, or I allow myself a little bit of breathing room with foods that are maybe not as, they're a little more comforting and not as healthy, quote unquote, or nutrient
Right.
dense, I should say, because I can afford to eat those foods. I can afford to eat more. So it's more about the portion and satisfying. I could scratch an itch and I won't pay for it if I have something that's a little more calorically dense after the fact. So
Mhm.
things like that. We're just being a little less calculated with how I'm tracking. I still pay
Yes.
attention to how much I'm eating, but I don't do it the same way I do it when I'm prepping, for example. I try to loosen up the reins. And these
Mhm.
things don't exactly play out as gracefully as I'm describing them, but they don't happen without effort. You have
For
to make an
sure.
effort to change the way that you do things, or spoiler alert, that decision's going to be made for you when you turn around and you're over snacking or having extra helpings or over ordering when you go out to eat or whatever, or just like struggling, like trying to prep food and realizing like you don't want to prep or you don't want to portion out food into containers, this and that. Like all those kinds of things, you got to find a way to shift and ease up a little bit on that stuff while still finding out how to eat in a way where you're aware of how much you're eating. Because again, if
Mhm.
you don't do that, if you don't change your patterns up, that decision is going to be made for you. That's what I've seen time and time again.
Yeah, I'd say I'm glad you asked that. I'd say the biggest like epiphany for me as far as losing control and, not having really a decision, as far as, you overdo it at a restaurant, just like you were saying. I found that I was usually craving something and it was be something that would kind of I would think about it in passing on and off. And until I actually went out and got the thing that I wanted, I would be stuck in this pattern of like, I just ate a lot of this food that I didn't really want, and it wasn't really that great. And sometimes you just have to put a pin in exactly what it is that you're craving. Because again, when you come off of these serious diets, they were so restricted before. You almost like feel like, did I forget what this even tastes like? What have I been missing out on all this time? I can't remember what, I'll give an example. We have sweet frogs around here that have the vegan pineapple Dole Whip, like at Disney. And that was one thing that was coming up again and again for me. And so obviously Disney is a long way away for me and being in Virginia. But thankfully I have the sweet frogs. So I was able to go get that and I felt so much better. Just like, oh man, that's actually what I wanted. And that was actually causing a lot of problems for me for a little while. Figuring out what you want, having it, trying to practice self-restraint with it. But if you don't have a moment of self-restraint, forgiving yourself for it, and usually, you're able to have a sense of like moving on a little bit after you've checked off those foods. That was my experience. I don't know if it's everyone's experience, but and absolutely, you're talking about eating like more calorie dense foods. I swear, my taste buds have changed after this prep. Isn't that great? Like, I'm eating a lot more calorie dense foods, but also part of that is because our kitchen is completely in shambles because Carson is redoing the entire kitchen. So, part of it is out of necessity, but other part is legitimately, I just want to have more protein bars than I had in the past. Am I going to beat myself up about it right now? Not really. I know at some point I'm going to have to reutilize those voluminous food tools and that knowledge that I have, but for now, as long as I'm not uncomfortable and I'm not super hungry yet, like go for it. That's how I
Yeah,
feel.
exactly. Those skills, those tools, that whole kit is there for you. It's not going to go away. It doesn't have to dictate and control like what you wind up doing after the fact. And it will if you don't work on it. And those, again, the way that you are is it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable process, but you are not alone. And I'd say most everyone goes through this, especially if they're able to like really hit their goal and it's something special. And hopefully I'm sure your goal is. So anyways, did you have any other last final thoughts or what have you?
No, I'm good. And I know we got to wrap it up because you're just going to hop right onto another podcast after this.
We're
But I
doing
think,
an episode with Ben, Danny, and I with an OCB with Sully. He does some shows here and he's pretty heavily involved with that bodybuilding organization. So I'm
yeah,
looking forward to seeing where that conversation takes us, and we'll keep this conversation going. But hopefully y'all got a lot of good out of this episode. Let us know what kind of feelings are tricky and challenging for you when you're having a hard time getting back on track, and what you do. Let us know what else you want us to talk about, and we'll keep this conversation going. All right, well, I guess I'll wrap it up, Alice. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Vegan Proteins Muscles by Brussels Radio. Please stay in touch with us at Muscles by Brussels, at Vegan Proteins on all the socials. Hit the contact button on veganproteins.com, and I promise you, you will get a video response from one of us right away. Once again, my name is 𝐬𝐿𝐫𝐿,
and I'm Alice.
and we'll talk to you soon.